in China and the US and in these markets. We saw that there's a tremendous opportunity, whether it's from the talent in India or in the case that we think that this technology will make the most difference really in emerging economies and in places with the kind of macro demographics that India possesses. So really happy to be here in India. I'll give a little introduction to Arthur. So I'm not sure, how many of you guys are in Professor Gujar's class? Very cool, very cool. So you guys have some decent background on maybe blockchain fundamentals and cryptocurrencies and such. But DFINITY is, Arthur will obviously go way more in depth, but in our opinion at DINI Labs, having reviewed so many different projects in this space, it's definitely one of the protocol layer projects and that we have the most respect for. They have a stellar team spanning across multiple disciplines. They have an extremely dedicated scientific roadmap, and they are releasing their testnet probably later this year or in next year. So I'll have Arthur do more, obviously, an in-depth introduction to DFINITY, but just saying from our opinion, we think that it's definitely one of the top 5 projects in this space. Arthur has a background himself in content marketing, a very colorful personality, and a very knowledgeable person in the blockchain ecosystem. He created one of the most popular podcasts, actually, starting in 2012, 2013. 2014, okay. But that's still early days, working on, so he produced a bunch of podcasts, one of which is really well known, is the Ether Review, talking to a lot of different people within, at that time, the Ethereum ecosystem. He's also produced content on his own platforms, and he now works at the DFINITY team as their head of content production. So I'm really happy to welcome Arthur, who's taking the time to come to India and visit all these schools, talk to these inspiring students, and hopefully give you guys and give the Indian ecosystem more generally maybe a more full-fledged view of what's really happening in the blockchain space internationally. So I won't take up any more of your time, but I'll be here as well to answer questions about DINI Labs. Happy to meet more students, always. And without further ado, Mr. Arthur Pauls.
Thank you, Kathy. What a glowing introduction. And thanks to DINI Labs as well for being such a great help. I mean, it's always challenging to navigate a new country, and India has certainly been an experience compared to San Francisco, right? It's quite a different place. So as Kathy indicated, I've been in the blockchain space for quite a while, since 2013, not quite 2012, which would have been great. But and I've been exploring the space for a really long time. I've been trying to figure out what's going on, what's actually happening, what is being built here. Blockchain is just one small piece of the puzzle. And I discovered DFINITY at the start of 2016, and I was completely captivated by one feature in particular, and that was its ability to generate randomness. And this is a really powerful tool in blockchain networks. And over the years, the many years, I think 2016, it's not too long ago actually that DFINITY was founded, but they've developed and adopted a bunch of really interesting technologies that are kind of the absolute forefront of this verifiable, secure, distributed computing kind of space or field of technologies that gets kind of lumped in under the single moniker of blockchain. So to begin with, I thought, this presentation is going to be, so maybe I'll wait till before we move on. But Ethereum, the whole idea behind Ethereum was everyone looked at Bitcoin and saw this incredible, this new idea, this new currency, this new way to transact that didn't involve any intermediary or any jurisdiction. And that was a really powerful idea, right? It came back to this idea of what it kind of sparked the interest of kind of libertarians and these Austrian economists and economics enthusiasts that always wanted a perfect, completely unregulated financial system. But the problem with it was that you can have your free money, your unregulated money, but the problem with it is, if you want to exchange or enter into a trade with someone, you need to be sure that they're going to hold up their end of the bargain. And if you're transacting anonymously over the internet with an untraceable kind of the sister project to Bitcoin, and that enabled exchange. And the cool thing was, if you think of Bitcoin and what it is, right? It's a ledger or a registry of addresses and account balances, to massively oversimplify it. And there is a set of, that's the data store, and there are a set of potential operations that can be made on that data store. But they're limited. The idea of Ethereum was to make them unlimited and allow you to store anything in a blockchain. And what this meant was you now had, effectively, a globally distributed, Turing-complete computing platform. Whereas before you only had the ability to move balances around, now you could, or to move numbers around on a ledger. Now this enabled you to do absolutely anything you wanted. To run arbitrarily complex, well, not truly arbitrarily complex, but we can imagine the vision was arbitrarily complex code. So with that being the case, having seen Ethereum launch in 2015, this vision of an internet computer suddenly kind of popped into people's minds. Maybe we just didn't need to have a smart contract platform that's designed to mediate exchange between parties. Maybe we could have something that was a general purpose computing resource that wasn't, although Ethereum is infinitely flexible, it does have, not quite, even though Ethereum is flexible and Turing complete, it does have some restrictions. For example, it can't run extremely high demand software because it's very expensive to run software on Ethereum. And its current instantiation software has to be executed 17,000 times in order for the consensus mechanism to work. So I'm kind of blasting along pretty quickly here. Do we have any questions? And I actually should stop asking questions more readily throughout. So no questions. So we're comfortable with this notion of a decentralized blockchain computer. So when you have these computers, right, or because of the way proof of work works, or blockchain consensus algorithms work, every single computer connected to the network has to perform the same operation in order to check that the output is compatible with what everyone else has produced. And so, because of this requirement, when you have a network of, say, 17,000 nodes, or miners, as Ethereum does, you need to execute the same piece of logic 17,000 times, and that is obviously extremely burdensome. It slows the network down, and it led to the desire for a technique called sharding, actually splitting the network up into smaller pieces, so that this useless overhead wasn't always required. But so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. That's Ethereum is this smart contract platform. The aim is to serve a social function, predominantly to mediate exchange. That was the original vision, and we've seen that in, say, ICOs, where you pay a token, an Ethereum token, and you get another type of tokens in response, and it's fully automated, and that exchange is unstoppable. With the internet computer, which is okay, so is that a bit of that? With DFINITY, which we also refer to as the internet computer, we aim to have a vastly more performant and vastly more general purpose, kind of global distributed computing resource that can host websites and manage business systems, etc. But if we're going to do this, we need to actually have a governance system or a way to mediate disputes about what takes place on the platform built into it. And to give a concrete example of why this is important, in the early days of Ethereum, a hedge fund, or an investment fund, I should say, was basically created in pure software on Ethereum. It was called the DAO. And basically it was opened up to anyone to contribute funds to. about 160 million US dollars worth of Ether was contributed to the DAO, which was shortly thereafter broken into with $60 million of that Ether stolen. And this was a complete disaster for a budding ecosystem. You know, this was a very significant portion of all Ether in existence. And it gave Ethereum this challenging, put them in a very challenging position. Does the community want to have a platform in which a huge portion of wealth has been stolen from the stakeholder base, from the actual users? You know, this is a really challenging position to be in. And so basically, what happened was everyone kind of sat down and said, do we want this to have happened? And this switched over to this weird thing when we think about mathematical consensus, kind of social consensus. Do we want to live in a world where this massive hedge fund has been broken into, where $60 million has been stolen from our user base? Or do we want to just erase this whole unpleasant event from history? And the discourse was a little bit challenging though, because as everyone's pretty familiar with, blockchains are supposed to be immutable, or at least that was the vision. Nothing is ever supposed to change. And so this led to two different factions. One faction where the history of events in the Ethereum universe was changed so that the DAO never actually occurred, never actually happened. And another version of history where the DAO existed and the funds were stolen. And so this was this caused a major rift in the community, and it split the community down the middle. Whereas if we had had some way for the community to make this decision for everyone on a pure majority voted basis, then we wouldn't have had this severe split in the community. And then there's another, over this theft. And then there's another major challenge, and that is, what do you do when you want to upgrade the protocol? What say someone breaks your cryptography? What say you find you've made some terrible mistake? Or what if someone who is using your blockchain protocol to run some extremely important piece of software, say a government software, say something related to an identity system, or say it's a bank software that controls a very large amount of money, and something strange like the DAO happens. You've got to have a way to fix that, and you've got to have a way for everyone to come together and make a decision around that without splitting off into multiple factions and multiple histories and events. And so that is what DFINITY has built into its platform, and the whole idea is that we need to have some way to kind of make these kind of changes. We also, so is anyone here familiar with the actor model of programming? Right, so if in Ethereum, we have this challenge where every single contract has to execute sequentially. And this is, again, part of the idea of having a social platform is you want to always know where anyone stands at any given moment. You don't want things to be kind of executing out of order if they are of relevance to you. The idea of the actor model is that we can actually still have, we can have concurrent execution. We can have software modules executing simultaneously, but without the non-deterministic behavior that is associated with parallel computing. So, you don't have these data races where there's a global variable that's going to be updated, and one software element has to execute and update that global variable before another one finishes. And that leads to inefficiencies, or if you want in performance, or if you want to be extremely secure, if you want to be extremely performant, if you want to actually have concurrent execution, it leads to risk of these global variables being updated incorrectly or software operating
But I mean, we still have logical data races, right? I mean, it just prevents sort of like physical data races from happening, but just because you pass messages around doesn't mean that the protocol is correct.
That the protocol is...
I mean, we can take this.
Okay, we'll take it offline.
Yeah,
it's a really interesting conversation. I mean, the Yeti model is super new, and it's one of these like really interesting kind of new things that have been discovered that bear really significantly on the way that we build kind of blockchain computing platforms. Scripting languages. So I saw a few hands go up when I asked how many people knew what Ethereum was. Has anyone written any software using Ethereum? Okay, so you would have used Solidity, the computing language Solidity, to do that, or Serpent or Viper. So the problem with having a single language, or having the Ethereum virtual machine, which is its own proprietary virtual machine, is that you need your own proprietary languages to interface with. And Solidity is really easy to use, and it's opened up blockchain programming to the world. But at the same time, it's led to this false impression that it's easy to write secure or financially secure software. And what we really need, if we're going to be doing that kind of programming and writing that kind of software, is more robust languages and more, and I should say, formally definable languages like Haskell, for one. And in order to use these languages in a blockchain computer, we need to have a compiler that will actually compile that language to run in that blockchain computer in that particular execution environment. And the most probable, or the most appealing solution for this kind of for this characteristic is WebAssembly, which is a general purpose. It's sometimes described as the world's first standard for software that runs anywhere. So it was co-developed by Apple, Google, Microsoft, and the Mozilla Foundation. And the idea was to bring any kind of execution, any kind of code to the web, and allow basically much higher performance execution of software that is written for the web. So we actually have a guy on staff who gives a talk called Neither Web Nor Assembly, because really what WebAssembly is a very it's a bytecode. It's a very thin abstraction layer over the most common hardware that you find in devices, and commonly used devices. So the beauty of it is you can write a piece of software, compile it to WebAssembly, and provided that you have the WebAssembly virtual machine running in a client of some sort on your device, you can run that same piece of software on an Apple iPhone, on an Android phone, on a Linux, or Microsoft or Mac desktop. And so that is like a really powerful new development that's taking place. And one of the cool side effects of it is that it's a formally verifiable language as well. So we can count on the deterministic behavior we need to make sure that logic executes in exactly the same way anywhere it runs. And this is like a requisite of an execution environment for a blockchain platform. So that's the kind of easy stuff. So any questions about WebAssembly? Are you guys familiar with, has anyone kind of been following the development of WebAssembly? Yeah, it's super cool. It's one of the most amazing things that's ever happened, right? Like, write once, run anywhere. It's totally incredible. It's going to completely change the way that software is produced.
So how different is it compared to Java? Because even it is, I guess, similar. You write once and execute anywhere. You have a JVM.
So it owes a bit of its philosophical kind of lineage to Java, right? The idea of Java was, okay, let's have one language that we can write stuff in, and we can run that on any platform. But the idea of WebAssembly goes way beyond that. Let's allow you to write in any language and run that on any platform. So right now there's a Haskell compiler that's been built for it, but a whole bunch of other compilers are being built as well currently. I mean, the vision is ultimately to have any language that exists will be a compiler will be built for WebAssembly, but not only that, new languages will be created for extremely niche purposes, because now that we have this common compile target for all hardware, you don't have to, if you write a language for a specific purpose, you don't have to worry about like, oh well, I can write it for that and only people who have Windows computers are going to be able to use it. That's not a threat anymore. Now you can create a new language, and that will run in absolutely every single computing environment that exists today. So, I mean, yeah, it's like Java, but amazing. And in the same way, it's sort of like JavaScript, but it's a way better compile target, or WebAssembly is a way better compile target. So, any more questions about WebAssembly? It's absolutely worth looking up, as is the Actor model, which is almost certainly going to be a standard for blockchain programming in the future. So pertaining to consensus, do we have any consensus buffs in the audience? Like, I remember I used to be really, really into blockchain consensus. It's like my favorite thing in the world. Have you guys looked into things like proof of work and and like proof of stake, the random beacons, those kind of things? Cool. Part of the power of blockchains is that we have the ability to incentivize, or public blockchains, a huge network of participants to work together to create this amazing, secure, global computing platform. But we need to incentivize that participation in the right way in order to kind of achieve A, security, but B, actual performance. Consensus is the biggest, is the place where we see the biggest threats for Byzantine actors or misbehaving actors in the network, but it's also the place where we kind of have to wind up experiencing the biggest performance hits. So there are the two primary main ways that these networks come to consensus, or the two primary envisioned ways, because the only really working proof of stake system has just been launched quite recently. But pretty much everything up until now has used something called Nakamoto consensus, or proof of work. And proof of work is what Bitcoin uses. It's worked. Up until this point, it's worked. But there's certainly no complaints about the job it's done so far. But it's extremely computationally intensive. It's very, very slow, and necessarily slow. In fact, its security is a function of the amount of time that has elapsed since an operation has occurred. And it's really never going to be able to bring us this vision of an internet computer, of a truly global a truly global computing resource that kind of everyone can use. The other thing is proof of stake, and that is where we take a cryptographic token like a Bitcoin, and we put it into one of these contracts described in when I was talking about Ethereum, this notion of smart contract. And it's locked up to ensure that a participant in the network behaves correctly, and often they're rewarded in exchange for locking up this token, these tokens. But if they misbehave, they can be penalized against that token. It's kind of those tokens that they've locked up. It's kind of like a security deposit that ensures ensures good behavior. And that's what DFINITY uses. Ethereum, being really the first of these platforms, it started off with proof of work, and it's always aimed to move to proof of stake for these very reasons. But it's a very hard thing to upgrade. I mean, Ethereum right now is worth $40 billion. Making a mistake on a live network of that scale and value would be catastrophic. And so it's a very challenging thing to upgrade. And so Ethereum for quite a while now has been locked into trying to figure out a way to do this without causing any trouble. So I saw a couple of people who put their hands up who have kind of researched proof of stake and other consensus algorithms. But is there do you kind of, is this something you guys are familiar with? Have you heard about proof of stake or some of the more novel protocols? So is there, what's the general consensus? I mean, especially what I've found is regionally, there's often different opinions about what will work and what is appropriate. Do you guys have an opinion about proof of work or proof of stake?
But two most applications we have very simple analysis and mistakes. Otherwise, you can't make these are not mentioned.
Right. And that's like one of the things. Actually, have you guys heard of Hyperledger? Hyperledger is pretty big here. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah, right. So Hyperledger is another one. This is actually made by IBM. And the idea is that it forgoes this challenging problem by just saying we will only allow computers to connect to the network who have kind of our permission. So that like short circuits like these problems. But yeah, it's pretty. So this is kind of pretty dense consensus stuff actually. Now that I'm looking at it. So one of the this is the thing that that really attracted me to DFINITY was the fact that it could generate randomness. In fact, it was an example of it is the first example of a protocol that can trustlessly generate randomness in a distributed network that is verifiable, unpredictable, and truly unmanipulable. And it's the first time this has ever been achieved. There's one other example, which is Algorand, which was it's a particularly niche field. But this is absolutely amazing. The notion of generating a random beacon that no one can manipulate allows you to do some really incredible stuff. Especially because just about anything can, if you're really relying on a source of randomness to secure a network, it's hard to find one, right? Like it's hard to find one that can't be gamed or cheated, right? I mean, there's a sense in which Bitcoin, their proof of work mining algorithm is all about generating randomness. And so we come to finality. So there's this notion of economic finality and cryptographic finality in blockchain networks. On the one hand, with economic finality, what we have is this extremely high cost of state reversion, of changing something that's in the blockchain. With DFINITY, we have cryptographic finality. And this is a feature of the random beacon. And it means it is literally impossible for anything to change. It's not that there is a cost associated with that change, it's that it is literally impossible unless an adversary takes over the entire network, in which case we've got bigger problems on our hands, for any change to take place in a blockchain after cryptographic finality has been achieved. And the beauty of this is that we can actually, in DFINITY, achieve this in 7 seconds, 2 blocks, plus network traversal time, which is super cool. And this is the network we're running, I think. There we go. So, anyone who's familiar with Bitcoin will kind of understand, will be familiar with this idea of like a 10-minute block time. With DFINITY, we're actually in this demonstration running at a 1 second block time with finality after 2 blocks. which means literally 2-second finality. Bitcoin, where there's this idea that we should be waiting 6 confirmations, which is a whole hour, and not only does this give us 2-second finality, it gives us like vastly greater security guarantees than proof of work, which can still potentially fall to a state reversion, a long-range state reversion attack. We have, in this example, right, this is obviously a really small network, but the notion is that we can scale this to over 1 million nodes. And while it will require us to reduce or to increase our block time, but we only have to increase it to something on the order of 3.5 seconds. So we still maintain a 7-second block time. But
Is it live or simulated?
it's live in the office. So right now we're just testing it and like load testing it. So we've got it up to 250 transactions a second, and it runs that way for a while and then crashes. So you can take that out of that if you're a good. We first demonstrated this in 2017 in October in 2017, and it was pretty cool. To finally see this random beacon operating, but it's taken a really long time to take that initial demonstration and turn it into something that is going to be ultimately a candidate for release. So we've basically been working all this time to do that, and also adding WebAssembly support and building the networking layer. All the stuff is phenomenally. Figuring all of these little things out has been phenomenally time-consuming.
Are you talk about random beacon?
Pardon me?
Are you going to talk about random beacon in more detail?
I can actually, yeah. I've got some other slides. Let's see. So yeah, I will. I'll switch over to another deck quite quickly and walk us through it. So that's DFINITY. You can reach me at arthur@dfinity.org, and I'd really like to hear from anyone who is interested in kind of next generation blockchains, secure distributed computation, all of that stuff. We're really interested. And if you put the subject autoresponder, you'll get an automatic response that has a bunch of information about DFINITY, as well as a form you can fill out. But you can just ask me anything. I do reply to all emails. So yeah, please get in touch. We have Telegram groups and other stuff where you can find resources about DFINITY as well. So that's the presentation about comparing DFINITY to Ethereum. I'll just switch over to a new deck, and we can actually take a look at how the random beacon actually works. Just has anyone heard of threshold cryptography?
Is the one where more than characters coming together simultaneously can encrypt it?
Well, the cool thing is you don't have to come together simultaneously.
Okay.
You can come together in any order you like. This is like totally amazing, and this blew my mind when I learned about it. So it's the same as public key cryptography, right, or asymmetric key cryptography. In fact, it is asymmetric. The only difference is that there are multiple pieces of the private key rather than a single unitary private key. So that's not multiple private keys, that's just multiple pieces of a single private key. And it's pretty cool. So the idea is just the same as with public key cryptography, right? You take your private key, you can sign a piece of data and produce a verifiable digital signature. Super simple stuff. With threshold cryptography, you take your pieces, or you take your piece of the private key, and you sign a piece of data, and what you get out of that is a piece of a signature, but not a complete signature. And all of the parties who share these pieces of a private key can each sign the same piece of data, each producing their own piece of the signature, and then share those signature shares, and provided they have a predetermined threshold, let's say for example, a majority of those shares, they can create a verifiable signature. The amazing thing about this though is no matter which signature shares are combined, you get the same verifiable signature. It's totally magic. So it's what we can kind of do with this is we can. It's really great for kind of operating in committees or making kind of having systems where a large group of participants each have a say, but we don't require everyone to participate, or even say, to simplify, we don't require everyone to participate in the signing of a particular piece of data in order to obtain a verifiable signature that might relate to an agreement. As we'll soon see, we can use that signature as a random beacon. So in DFINITY, we use committees to generate randomness, and as I'm sure you can probably kind of predict, these committees are using threshold cryptography to create threshold signatures. And we need a new group every time we generate a random beacon, so that no group ever has control of the system. And that group is of course going to be selected by the random beacon. And to walk through the process, we start with randomness. And we can imagine this as kind of the first block. This doesn't require any special ceremony. This can be just any old bit of randomness. You know, your mother's maiden name, your Aadhaar number. It could be anything, right? It doesn't matter where we get this randomness from. And we use that to select from the network a committee of nodes. And these nodes, run a distributed key generation algorithm that gives them all a piece of a private key and a public key to be distributed for the purpose of verifying their collective signature. They then sign the randomness that was used to select them. And once those signature shares are collected and aggregated, we wind up with a verifiable signature, a deterministic verifiable signature that no one could have predicted because of the way that the distributed key generation algorithm works, but also no one could have stopped producing and no one got to see before anyone else. No one had advanced knowledge of this. It emerged from the aggregation of all of these signature shares. And we then use that random beacon to select the next committee that then runs the DKG, the distributed key generation algorithm, signs the randomness that selected them to create the next random beacon. That selects the next group, and on it goes. And this is part of the reason it can happen so quickly. We can spin up these new committees so quickly, or we can spin up blocks so quickly. And again, that's the network running. And so to give context, now that we've actually seen this, so all of the grey dots are all of the nodes in the network running simultaneously. The threshold group size, the number of pieces of the private key, is 100, but the requirement is only 51 shares of that signature in order to create a verifiable signature. As far as, there's the threshold groups. We probably don't want to go into that because that sends us way down a rabbit hole. But yeah, that's what's taking place there. Incidentally, something we found is that the higher the block time, the more uniform it becomes. So you can see how that lower graph there has this undulating block time. if we if we increase the block time to 2 seconds, that becomes a totally flat line. And that's really, really significant when when you think of the benefits of being able to get kind of uniform behavior out of the system.
Actually, people committee size?
Pardon me?
It's committee size fixed or it's function of the network size?
So the committee size is baked into the protocol. So we might want to change the size of the committee. Manoush, our technical, or our kind of academically, Manoush Mubahidi, she's totally incredible, unbelievable, really, really worth reading her paper, Rapid Chain, which she produced at Visa, which is totally incredible about super fast blockchains. But she has mentioned the idea that maybe we should be having a group of 800, where we have previously been thinking we'll go with 400. If we change our mind after the fact, right at the start of the talk I mentioned the importance of having on-chain governance, having a way for all of the users of the system to change a characteristic of it, such as the size of the threshold group. So that's stuff we've gone through. So I haven't really answered a bunch of questions for those blockchain buffs out there. How does the Threshold Relay Committee generate key pair shares? That's that's super deep academic stuff and beyond my puny mind. Although it does use non-interactive proofs, like zero knowledge proofs. We've looked at bullet proofs and ZK Starks and all this kind of cool stuff. Actually, we have a Indian intern right now who is conducting research on exactly the best way to run the distributed key generation algorithm. Eswar, he's really incredible. I haven't really talked about how block signing occurs, although you can probably divine how this powers a consensus algorithm, how we can use this to secure a scaled network, and what we might use a system like this for. And that's kind of a big question. What do we use blockchains for? It's an open question. Our vision is to allow this kind of blockchain to run any software system that would traditionally be run in the cloud, with the exception of high-performance computing applications. That's the vision. But in order to do that, we need these extremely powerful kind of random beacons, basically. And again, so that's the tail end of my randomness presentation that we'll be giving at India. Does anyone have any questions? Was that clear?
Currently, you are only a 50 transaction per second.
Pardon me?
Currently, you are able to handle up to 50 transactions per second.
Not for a persistent amount of time. So 50 transactions per second will run indefinitely, but 250 transactions it will not run indefinitely. We're pretty confident we can get to 300 transactions per second at launch without too much difficulty. A lot of it is because the work hasn't gone into optimizing the performance of the consensus algorithm and transaction throughput. Most of our work has been on getting this thing secure and plugging in programmability like the WebAssembly virtual machine and defining the execution model, the networking, all that kind of stuff.
What language is this?
Haskell. Originally, the networking was written in Go, and there were some other there were some other languages in there. I think there was some C in there as well. But the decision was made to just pair everything back to Haskell.
Is there any effort on formally defining parts of the implementation?
The whole thing.
But how?
Really good question. I don't know. I can't answer that. I'm not technical to that extent, but I'm really happy to relay any question you might have to the rest of the team.
So, in the proof of stake system, I know that any miner block depends on the proportionality of the stake in the system. So,
Sorry?
the proof of stake system for a miner to mine a block depends on the proportionality of the stake in the system. miners stake in the system.
Yes, right, yeah.
So for a newcomer in DFINITY, how difficult it is to mine a block? Because there will already be miners who pretty much will stake in the system.
Right. So the question was, how hard is it? Is it hard for new entrants into the network, new participants in the Ethereum, in the DFINITY network to mine blocks? And the answer is, it's actually easy. So there's a fixed deposit size. Typically we think of, when we think proof of stake, and I don't know, you know, I really don't like the term proof of stake, because it kind of makes us think of kind of Bitcoin and proof of work and stuff. What we just have is you post a security deposit or a bond. Everyone has the same size bond. Every node has the same size bond, and that makes it a node. No, you know, if you want to have twice the rewards, then you just need to have 2 nodes with 2 different security deposits, and those deposits need to be of equal size.
I know that for those protocol, it comes with, it is like that. It motivates for even solo miners to mine in the system to unbuild blocks and stake blocks. In DFINITY, as you said, a committee, they have to work in groups. So, is it compulsory for a solo miner to be a part of the team to interact with the system?
So the way that this works is just by running the protocol will automatically place a user of the network into a committee. It runs in epochs. I think I've actually got, yeah, here we go. Because this question always comes up. I should just put this in the actual presentation. It runs in epochs, and at the start of each epoch, a bunch of committees are selected from the existing node base. Those committees run the distributed key generation algorithm in private at their own leisure during that epoch. And then at the beginning of the following epoch, they become active, and so the random beacon selects from committees from that committee base.
So I might understand that a committee is formed through a random process. There's a group of people, you just form a committee randomly.
Yes.
Through network geography or something like that.
Yes, so the network just does everything, and the way that it works as well is you don't have to, the block maker is randomly selected from the network, probabilistically, so we actually rank all of the block makers in the network, or all of the nodes in the network, and basically anyone in the network can create a block and publish it and publish it by sending it to the committee, and that committee then will gossip the block around, signing it until they've received a 51, a majority of signature shares and create a verifiable signature, and then that block becomes valid. We have a way of choosing between blocks, and that's by ranking, like I said, ranking all of the block makers in the entire network, and by doing that, if say the block maker, node 0, the primary block maker, fails to produce a block or takes too long, and say block maker 1 is also kind of slow, block maker 2 may be the block maker that propagates its block the fastest and actually gets signed or collects the requisite number of signature shares and then becomes the canonical version of events. But I'm not sure that there's even a need to incentivize or to reward the block maker themselves. It might be possible to just reward everyone in the network in exactly the same way, because all of this is mediated by the network, everything is randomly selected. That kind of uncertainty may not even be necessary.
So I mean, in some slide, you essentially mentioned. So basically, there is a slide where you mentioned cryptographic finality, but then also in the beginning, you talked about the thing that happened with Ethereum, right? Like basically the whole hard fork thing. So if such a situation happens, in the case of DFINITY, wherein someone writes insecure code and someone finds an exploit and pulls out money, what's going to happen? I guess, like, how will this be resolved? I don't really understand the social process around
Right,
Yeah.
I've left that out completely.
Okay.
Because DFINITY is such a huge and sprawling protocol, that's why I don't, don't include everything in a single talk. But, that's a really great question. So we have this system we call the blockchain nervous system, and it's an application that runs on top of the blockchain, or on the DFINITY blockchain.
Sure.
That has super user privileges and can execute code and change state, and to determine the canonical version of state. So, say you wanted to change some state in such a way that would traditionally be seen as that would, by any other rule of the network, be considered an invalid state change.
Mm-hmm.
The blockchain nervous system super user module, we're calling it, can make these state changes and kind of, even though they may not be valid by those other rules,
Right.
they're considered valid by the protocol. And the way that that it determines how to make those, what changes to make, and whether or not there's consensus around them, is you get all participants in the network can submit a proposal to the blockchain nervous system, and all the participants in the governance system, who basically place a bond, and that's proportionate to their ability to vote, can vote on those proposals.
Right, so it's kind of like a rule-changing game, wherein the super user can essentially edit whatever's happening in the network as long as enough people agree on it.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
I mean, that's a massive oversimplification,
Right.
but the mechanism. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
No worries. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, if there's anything you'd like to ask me out of band, please do. Do email me. Let's see. Please do email me. I really love to hear from everyone. We're going to be spending more and more time in India, not in the short term, but certainly in the medium term, maybe in the short term. I'd like to. I like it here. And I mean, India is this huge emerging market. I mean, this is it. This is the most important market in the world, basically, for engineering talent and kind of just all of the awesome things that come with an exploding nation. And so we're really excited to hear from anyone here who's keen to get involved, and I do encourage everyone to get as involved in this emerging field while it's nascent, because this is kind of the big next thing. I don't know necessarily how it's going to play out, but certainly it's blockchain is something we should all be learning about.
Maybe you should talk a bit about the team.
Oh, the team. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the team. Let's see. I can always bring up the team page. I'll see if we've got proof of work. We have Andreas Rosberg, who was the co-developer of. He was the co-developer of WebAssembly itself, and currently the most influential developer in kind of ongoing development of WebAssembly, which is this, the next global computing standard, which gives DFINITY this great influence over this really powerful new standard, which is really amazing. Ben Lin, the L from BLS cryptography, he's incredibly famous, and our fearless leader Dominic Williams, guy in the top left there. He's the guy who invented a bunch of the core technology. Totally amazing guy, and so it's a spectacular team. It's like the smartest group of people I think I'll ever have the privilege to be around. Present company accepted, of course. So anyway, please please ask me anything out of band. Please email me, I'd really like to get to know kind of what's happening in Hyderabad. We've also got some stickers here, if you would like some stickers. So thanks so much.